Good evening, and welcome to this special edition of SciLine. I'm Barbara Novak. Imagine, ever since you were a child, you dreamed of being a military pilot. You went to school every day, studied hard, and one day were admitted to the Air Force Academy. You studied harder and graduated near the top of your class. You were ready to become a military airman when one test caused all your dreams to come crashing down. One uncontrollable result that grounded you forever. Tonight, I will investigate a topic that has been raising major ethical issues in the workplace for the last 2 decades. Discrimination is not a new concept in regards to the workplace. Minorities have fought against employment discrimination for hundreds of years. However, advances in science and technology have ushered in a new form of discrimination befitting the new millennia. Genetic testing is becoming the newest prerequisite to the hiring process, with genetic research making leaps and bounds day by day, even hour by hour. The implications of genetic discrimination is gaining renewed interest and apprehension in the minds of the working population. It's causing questions such as, will I need to be genetically tested before I'm hired? What will test results do to my insurance premiums? Will I be ineligible for certain jobs due to what employers will see as genetic defects? Here is our story.
As Americans, we grew up believing that we live in a sweet land of liberty, where our only concerns are achieving life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As children, we were never told that into these unalienable rights are interwoven the invisible letters that create words like bias, prejudice, and discrimination. In one small American town, there is a woman who is all too familiar with those unspoken but insinuated words. She is just like any one of us, and she is, of all people, an employee of the state. This woman, who we'll call Kate, has agreed to tell her story to SciLine, but has asked that we do not show her face in order to protect her anonymity.
When I was a social worker, we took a workshop about caring for people with chronic illnesses. In a personal session, I shared my experience as my mother's caretaker. She had Huntington's disease. A week later, despite glowing performance reviews, I was fired.
Kate's story, while heartbreaking, could happen to anyone, and employers bypassing potential employees or terminating current ones due to their knowledge of an employee's personal genetic information is the most common form of genetic discrimination. Until 2008, the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 provided some federal protection against discrimination from genetic testing. On May 21st of that year, President Bush signed the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, into law. GINA is what legally protects Americans against genetic discrimination in regards to health insurance and employment. However, even now, with the law and other such governmental good intentions on the side of the employee, genetic discrimination is still an unspoken threat in the minds of many employees. One lawyer, who we'll call Jenna, spoke with SciLine on the issue.
My mother and my aunt both had breast cancer. I thought about getting tested for the BRCA1 gene, but I decided against it because I thought if I tested positive, I would be overlooked for promotions at my law firm.
More than a decade ago, Al Gore's 1998 administration report titled Genetic Information and the Workplace stated that more and more employers are using genetic testing and monitoring as a condition of employment. Be that as it may, an evaluation of the scientific basis for commercial genetic tests, published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, suggested that the evidence of clinical validity is often minimal and sometimes entirely absent. Even in 2008, the former Secretary's Advisory Committee on Genetics, Health, and Society of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services released a report identifying gaps in the regulation, oversight, and usefulness of genetic testing. However, there is argument that an employer who refuses to hire someone with a genetic marker isn't being irrationally biased, and some believe there are cases where discrimination is cost justified. It is chalked up to being bad ethics, but not bad economics. And it is well known that the majority of employers are concerned with protecting the bottom line, and there is fear in the workforce that genetic discrimination may become universal. On general ethical principle, genetic screening is a violation of basic human rights. But are there any cases where genetic testing for certain job positions is validated, not only for the safety of colleagues, but for the employee themselves? An example might be by improving workplace safety by flagging conditions that might cause seizures in employees who operate dangerous machinery. Perhaps, but we must remember that genetic screening has been historically used to justify different types of discrimination for a wide range of reasons. As Karen Rothenberg, Dean of the University of Maryland School of Law, reminds us, restrictive immigration laws against Eastern Europeans in the 1920s, sterilization policies, Nazi atrocities, and insurance and employment discrimination against carriers of the sickle cell trait were justified by the power of genetic information. Advances in genetics will undoubtedly benefit the human race in a variety of ways, cures for previously incurable diseases being one among many. However, U.S. journalist Russell Baker succinctly puts into words the apprehension inherent in the facts presented by Karen Rothenberg. He states, usually, terrible things that are done with the excuse that progress requires them are not generally progresses at all, but just terrible things. Genetic discrimination during the hiring process may seem trivial to some, but we should not forget that ignoring so-called harmless forms of bias might cause more severe, and possibly deadly, forms of prejudice.
Thank you for watching this special edition of SciLine. I'm Barbara Novak. Good night.